For 50 years, a man named Elias has lived off the grid in the deepest, most inaccessible valleys of the Pacific Northwest. He went in as a young man, a soldier broken by the horrors of Vietnam, looking for a place to die alone. He didn't die. Instead, he was adopted. He spent 5 decades living alongside a tribe of Sasquatch. He learned their language, their customs, and their secrets. He saw them not as monsters, but as a people. And now, sensing his own time is coming to an end, Elias has decided to break his silence. He claims the alpha of the tribe shared a message with him, a specific, terrifying prophecy about the future of humanity. You might not believe in Bigfoot, but after you hear what Elias has to say, you might wish they weren't real. Because if he is telling the truth, we are all in serious trouble. Hit that like button, subscribe, and settle in. This is the confession of a lifetime. People ask me why I stayed. They ask how a man walks away from electricity, from hot showers, from other people, and never looks back for half a century. They think I was hiding. They think I was some fugitive or a madman. Maybe I was in the beginning. My name is Elias. In 1973, I came home from Da Nang with a Purple Heart in my duffel bag and a war raging inside my head that no metal could silence. I was 24 years old, but I felt ancient. I tried to reintegrate. I really did. I got a job at a mill in Washington State, renting a room above a hardware store. But the silence of the city, it wasn't real silence. It was just a pause between noises. And in those pauses, I could hear the jungle. I could smell the cordite and the burning jet fuel. I could see the faces of the boys who didn't make it to the LZ. I stopped sleeping. The doctors gave me pills. The pills made me feel like I was wrapped in cotton wool, unable to breathe. I started drinking. The whiskey helped for a while until it didn't, until the anger started bleeding out. I got into fights. I woke up in jail cells not knowing how I got there. I was becoming something dangerous, not to others, but to myself. On a rainy Tuesday in April 1974, I made a choice. I cashed my disability check, bought a used Ford pickup, packed a canvas tent, my grandfather's hunting rifle, an axe, and enough beans and rice to last 6 months. I drove west until the roads ran out. Then I hiked. I hiked until my legs burned and my lungs screamed. I wanted to go where the map was blank. I wanted to go where the only law was survival. I told myself I was going there to heal. That was a lie. I was going there to disappear. I was going there because I figured if the forest killed me, at least it would be honest about it. It wouldn't smile at me while it did it. I didn't know I was walking into a kingdom. I didn't know that for the last 50 years I wouldn't be a hermit. I would be a student. And the things I've seen, the things I've learned in the shadow of those giants, it changes you. It strips away the civilization you wear like a costume and shows you what you really are. I'm going to tell you everything, from the first track to the final warning. But I have to warn you, once you know, you can't unknow. The woods will never look the same to you again. The first thing you learn about the deep bush in the Olympic Peninsula is that it's alive. I don't mean alive with squirrels and deer. I mean the land itself feels conscious. The moss swallows sound. The trees are so big they block out the sky, creating a perpetual twilight even at noon. It's a cathedral of damp wood and rotting leaves. I found a spot about 18 miles from the nearest logging track. It was a box canyon, carved out by glaciers a million years ago, with steep granite walls on 3 sides and a fast-moving creek cutting through the middle. It was defensible. That's the soldier in me talking. Even when you're running from war, you look for a perimeter. I set up camp on a rise above the creek. For the first 2 weeks, it was just me and the physical labor. And God, I needed that labor. I worked myself into the ground. I felled smaller trees to reinforce my tent. I dug a latrine. I built a stone fire pit. I chopped wood until my hands blistered and bled, and then I chopped some more. I wanted to be too tired to dream. But the isolation does things to a man's mind. Without the constant distraction of society, your brain starts to eat itself. The silence becomes a mirror. I started talking to myself. First, just narrating what I was doing. Grab the axe, Elias. Stoke the fire, Elias. Then I started talking to the guys who weren't there anymore. I'd have full conversations with my platoon sergeant while I was fishing in the creek. I'd laugh at jokes nobody told. I was cracking. I knew it. But I didn't care. It was about 3 weeks in when the feeling started. You know that sensation when you're in a crowded room and you feel someone staring at the back of your neck? You turn around and sure enough, Eyes are locked on you. Now imagine that feeling, but amplified by 1,000. Imagine it out in the middle of nowhere, where the only thing supposed to be watching you is a jaybird or a squirrel. It started subtle. I'd be chopping wood, the axe ringing against the cedar, and suddenly the hair on my arms would stand up. The woods would go quiet, not the normal quiet. A heavy, pressurized silence. The birds would stop mid-song. The wind would die. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. I'd stop, axe in hand, chest heaving, scanning the tree line. "Who's there?" I'd scream. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the moss. "I'm armed, come out." Nothing. Just the drip, drip, drip of water from the canopy. Then came the movement of objects. I'm a disciplined man. The army drills that into you. A place for everything, everything in its place. My rifle was always leaned against the same rock. My canteen was always hung on the same branch. My boots were always side by the tent flap. One morning, I woke up, and my boots were gone. I tore the camp apart. I thought maybe a coyote dragged them off. I found them 50 yards away, placed neatly on top of a flat boulder in the middle of the creek. Not chewed, not dragged. Placed, side by side, facing the camp, like they were watching me. I waded out into the freezing water to get them, shivering, rifle held high. I looked at the mud on the bank. No prints, just smooth, undisturbed river silt. "All right," I muttered, my teeth chattering. "You want to play games? Let's play." I went into full combat mode. I treated the canyon like a fire base in the Mekong. I set tripwires using fishing line and empty tin cans around the perimeter. I cleared brush to open up firing lanes. I slept with the 30.6 across my chest, safety off, one eye open. I was hunting a ghost. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in. If you've never ridden out a storm in the Olympics, you don't know noise. The thunder doesn't just crack, it rolls through the valleys like artillery fire. The wind screams through the fir trees, snapping branches the size of a man's leg. I was huddled in my lean-to, trying to keep the fire alive, when I heard the cans rattle. Clink, clink, clink. My tripwire. Sector 3. Behind the tent. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle and burst out into the rain. My flashlight beam cut through the deluge, sweeping the trees. "Contact!" I yelled, reverting to training. "Show yourself!" The beam hit something. At first, my brain couldn't process it. I saw a tree trunk. A massive, dark, hairy tree trunk. Then the tree trunk moved. It stepped sideways. It was bipedal. It was standing on 2 legs, but it was immense. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Shoulders so wide they blocked out the brush behind it. The rain matted its fur, making it look slick and ancient. It stood just at the edge of my light, a towering shadow against the storm. I brought the rifle up. The crosshairs found the center of the chest. My finger tightened on the trigger. This was it. The enemy. The intruder. But I didn't fire, because it wasn't attacking. It was standing perfectly still, one arm raised, palm open. A human gesture. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Back off!" The creature made a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a low, rumbling chitter deep in its chest. It sounded like rocks grinding together underwater. It slowly lowered its arm and took a step back, fading into the darkness. I fired a warning shot into the air. Crack! The sound was deafening. The flash blinded me for a second. When my vision cleared, the creature was gone. I spent the rest of that night shivering, back pressed against the rock wall, rifle trained on the darkness. I didn't sleep. I replayed that image in my head 1,000 times. The size of it, the hand, the palm facing me. Why didn't it charge? A bear would have charged or run. A cougar would have stalked. This thing, it negotiated. It communicated. The next morning, the sun came out, mocking me with its brightness. The woods looked innocent again. I went to the spot where it had stood. The rain had washed away most of the sign, but the impression was there. A deep depression in the leaf litter, 2 feet long, heavy. I sat there on a log, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. I put my head in my hands. "I'm losing my mind," I whispered. "I'm seeing monsters." I decided to pack up. I couldn't handle it. The isolation, the ghosts, and now this. I was going to hike out. I started breaking camp, moving fast, careless. That was my mistake. In the woods, carelessness is a death sentence. I had a heavy pack on, probably 80 pounds of gear. I was navigating a steep ridge above the creek, trying to find a shortcut to the game trail. The ground was slick mud hidden under ferns. I took a step, and the earth just gave way. It wasn't a stumble. It was a collapse. The hillside sloughed off. I fell 20 feet, tumbling through briars and rocks. I slammed into a ledge, felt my knee pop with a sickening crunch, and then kept rolling until I hit the creek bed. I landed on my back, the breath knocked out of me. The sky spun. I tried to sit up, and a bolt of white-hot agony shot up my leg. I screamed. It was a raw animal sound. I looked down. My right leg was bent at an angle that made me want to vomit. The knee was blown out, completely useless. I reached for my rifle. Gone. It must have flown out of my hand during the fall. I checked my belt. My knife was there. That was it. I was 3 miles from my camp, 18 miles from the nearest road, with a destroyed leg. I dragged myself out of the water, gasping, sweat pouring into my eyes. I wedged myself against a driftwood log. Okay, I said, panting. Okay, assess, improvisate, overcome. But I knew. I looked at the canyon walls towering above me. I looked at the darkening sky. I wasn't getting out of here. The predators would smell the blood, or the cold would get me first. I gripped the knife handle until my knuckles turned white. Come on then, I hissed at the trees. Finish it. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the ridge. The shadows lengthened, turning into fingers reaching for me. The temperature dropped. I was shivering uncontrollably now, shock setting in. Then I heard it, snap, a heavy branch breaking, close. Thud, 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 footsteps, heavy enough to vibrate the ground under my back. I raised the knife. I'm here, I yelled, my voice weak. I'm right here. The bushes parted. He stepped out. It was the same one from the night before. I recognized the scar on his shoulder, a patch of lighter fur where something had clawed him years ago. He was massive. Up close, in the fading light, he was terrifying. The muscles moved under that pelt like steel cables. His face was dark, leathery, covered in wrinkles. He looked old. He looked powerful. He stood over me, blocking out the remaining light. I could smell him. Musk, wet dog, and something earthy, like truffle. I braced myself for the blow. I waited for him to rip me apart. He looked at my leg. Then he looked at my face. His eyes were amber, deep, intelligent amber. There was no aggression in them. There was curiosity, and maybe recognition. He knelt down. The movement was surprisingly graceful for a creature that must have weighed 800 pounds. He reached out a hand. The fingers were thick, tipped with black, flat nails. I slashed at him with the knife. Get back! He didn't flinch. He moved his hand faster than I could follow, slapping the knife out of my grip. It flew 10 feet away into the creek. I was defenseless. Do it, I whispered. Just do it. He grunted. A low, soft sound. Whew. Then he reached behind him and pulled something from a crude satchel made of woven vines. It was a handful of wet moss. He packed it around my knee. The cold of the moss numbed the heat of the injury instantly. Then he pulled out a strip of bark. Cedar. Flexible and strong. He wrapped it around the moss, binding the leg tight. A splint. He knew first aid. My brain couldn't process it. I stared at him, mouth open. He finished the binding and sat back on his haunches, looking at me. Then he pointed a massive finger at himself and thumped his chest. Thump, thump. Then he pointed at me. He waited. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as dust. I tapped my own chest. Elias, I whispered. The creature tilted his head. He tried to mimic the sound. As, he rumbled. The voice was guttural, struggling with the vowels. Then he thumped his chest again and made a sound. Kara, Kara. He stood up then, towering over me again. He looked into the woods and let out a sharp whistle. 2 more shapes emerged from the shadows. Smaller but still huge. He looked back down at me, then gestured with his head. He wasn't leaving me. He bent down and scooped me up in his arms like I was a child. The strength was absolute. I weighed 200 pounds and he lifted me without a grunt of effort. I rested my head against his massive chest. I could hear his heart beating. Slow, powerful. Thump, thump, thump. As he carried me into the darkening tree line, away from the creek, away from my camp, away from the world I knew, I had one last coherent thought. before the pain medication of shock knocked me out. I had come to the woods to find death. Instead, I had found a tribe. That was the first day. The day I stopped being a human being and started being something else. A pet? A guest? A prisoner? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that Goliath, or Kara as they called him, had decided I was worth saving. And that decision would cost him more than I could ever repay. Waking up didn't feel like waking up. It felt like resurfacing, like coming up for air after being held underwater for too long. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight of where I was. It was the smell. In the open woods, the air is clean, thin. Here, the air was thick. It tasted of wood smoke, curing meat, crushed pine needles, and that heavy, musky scent of wet fur. It wasn't a dirty smell exactly. It was organic. It was the smell of a den. I tried to move and my body screamed. My right leg was a pillar of fire. I groaned, the sound scraping out of my dry throat. Quiet, I told myself. Assess the situation. I blinked the grit out of my eyes and tried to sit up. I was lying on something soft, not the hard ground. It was a bed made of woven hemlock boughs, stacked a foot high and covered in furs, elk hides mostly, thick, warm, and smelling of animal grease. I looked around. The panic should have set in then. By all rights, I should have been clawing at the walls. I was in a cave, but calling it a cave feels like an insult. It was a chamber. The ceiling vaulted up maybe 20 feet into the darkness, lost in shadows. In the center, a fire was burning low. Not a roaring bonfire, but a controlled, smokeless heat built into a circle of river stones. And I wasn't alone. Across the fire, sitting cross-legged on a flat rock, was a figure. Not Ka-Ra, not the giant who carried me. This one was smaller, if you can call 7 feet small. Her fur was lighter, streaked with gray and blonde, especially around the face. Her breasts were visible beneath the hair, heavy and sagging with age. She was scraping a hide with a sharp stone tool. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Rhythmic, practiced. She stopped the moment I moved. She didn't jump. She didn't snarl. She just rotated. Her head turned toward me with that eerie, owl-like smoothness. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and framed by deep wrinkles. I froze. My hand went to my belt instinctively. No knife, no gun. I was stripped down to my undershirt and trousers. My boots were gone. I was completely at her mercy. "Hey," I croaked. My voice sounded pathetic in that stone room. She watched me. Then she made a sound, a soft coo, like a dove, but deeper. She set the stone tool down and stood up. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Stay back," I whispered. "I don't want trouble." She ignored me. She walked around the fire, moving with a heavy, shuffling gait. When she got close, the smell of her was intense. Wild herbs and earth. She towered over me. Her face was a landscape of leather and hair, a broad, flat nose, thin lips, and eyes that seemed to look right through my skin and count my bones. She knelt down beside me. Her hand, massive and calloused, reached out. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut, waiting for the crushing blow. Instead, I felt cool fingers touch my forehead. She was checking my temperature. Then she moved to my leg. I looked down. My trousers had been cut open up to the thigh. My knee was encased in a stiff cast made of dried mud and bark, bound tight with sinew. It was professional work, better than some field dressings I'd seen in Vietnam. She prodded the swelling above the cast. I hissed in pain. She looked at me, making a clicking sound with her tongue. Tsk, tsk, a scolding sound. Then she reached into a wooden bowl on the floor beside her. She scooped out a handful of green paste. It smelled like mint and crushed devil's clubroot, and slapped it onto my skin. The stinging was sharp for a second, then it faded into a dull, cooling numb. "Who are you?" I asked, staring up at her. She didn't answer. She just grunted, wiped her hands on her fur, and went back to the fire. I lay there for hours, drifting in and out. I watched the shadows dance on the walls. As my eyes adjusted, I started to see details that shattered everything I thought I knew about evolution. The walls weren't bare. Near the back, where the firelight flickered, there were markings, scratches in the stone, not random, patterns, circles intersecting, lines representing trees, and handprints. Dozens of handprints stained in red ochre overlapping each other. This wasn't an animal's den. This was a home. This was a history book. Sometime later, I had lost track of day and night. Kara returned. The air pressure in the cave changed before he even stepped in. A massive shadow blocked the entrance, which I realized was covered by a hanging curtain of woven vines. He pushed through, carrying the carcass of a deer over one shoulder like it was a backpack. He dropped the deer by the fire. The female looked up and made a series of high-pitched chatters. He responded with a low rumble, gesturing toward the storm outside. It was like watching a married couple debrief after a workday. Then Kara looked at me. He walked over, his footsteps heavy but silent on the dirt floor. He squatted down, his face level with mine. Up close, his size was oppressive. His shoulders were so wide I felt like I was sitting in the shade of a mountain. He looked at my leg, then at the female. She nodded and made a soft grunt. He looked back at me. He pointed to the deer, then to his mouth. "Eat," I whispered. He understood the intent. He reached over, tore a strip of raw meat from the deer with his bare hands. The sound of the muscle tearing made me wince, and offered it to me. I shook my head. "Fire," I said, pointing to the flames. "Cook." He frowned. The concept seemed to annoy him, but he tossed the strip onto a hot stone near the coals. He watched it sizzle, mesmerized. We fell into a routine over the next few days. I named the female matriarch. She was the doctor, the keeper of the fire, the boss. Kara was the hunter, the guardian. But there were others. Sometimes I'd see small faces peeking through the vine curtain. Children, little ones covered in fuzz, eyes wide as saucers, watching the hairless thing in the corner. The matriarch would shoo them away with a sharp bark, like a mother bear protecting cubs from a trap. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the silence in my own head. For 2 years my mind had been a chaotic mess of gunfire and screaming. Now, I had nothing to do but think. I lay there, unable to walk, dependent on monsters for my survival. I thought about my rifle. I asked Kara about it once, pantomiming the shape of a gun and making a boom sound. He narrowed his eyes. His lip curled, revealing square, yellow teeth. He made a slashing motion with his hand. No, he hated it. He knew what it was. He knew what it did, and he wasn't allowing it in his house. That shamed me. Here I was, the civilized man, the soldier, and the only thing I brought to the table was a machine designed to kill. He brought food. He brought medicine. He brought shelter. Who was the savage? On the 4th day, the fever broke. The fog in my head lifted. I woke up needing to relieve myself. Badly. I tried to stand. My good leg held, but the bad one was useless dead weight. I grabbed a sturdy stick Kara had left near the bed and used it as a crutch. I hobbled toward the entrance. The matriarch watched me but didn't stop me. I pushed through the vine curtain and stepped out. The brightness blinded me. I shielded my eyes. I was on a ledge, a natural stone shelf about halfway up a sheer cliff face. Below me, 100 feet down, the forest spread out like a green ocean. The mist clung to the treetops. I could see the creek where I fell, winding like a silver thread. The vantage point was strategic. You could see everything coming for miles. No wonder they picked this spot. It was a fortress. I took care of my business, leaning against the rock wall, feeling the cold wind on my face. It felt good. It felt like life. I turned to go back inside, and that's when I saw it, lying on a flat stone near the entrance, neatly arranged. My wallet, my keys to the Ford truck, my dog tags, and my knife. Kara must have gone back to the creek. He had retrieved my things. I picked up the knife. The weight of the steel felt familiar, comforting. It was a weapon, a way to defend myself, a way to kill. I looked at the dark opening of the cave. I could hear the matriarch humming something inside, a low, vibrating tune. I stood there for a long time, gripping the handle. I could try to limp down the mountain. I could try to make it back to the truck. I could escape. But escape to what? To the pill bottles? To the nightmares? To a world that looked at me like I was broken? I looked at the knife again. Then, I looked at the dog tags, the symbol of who I used to be, Sergeant Elias. I put the dog tags in my pocket, but I placed the knife back on the rock. I left it there. I wasn't a soldier anymore. Not here. Here, I was a guest. And you don't bring a weapon to the dinner table. I turned and limped back into the darkness of the cave. When I sat back down on my bed, Kara was there. He was watching me. He looked toward the entrance, then back at me. He knew I had found the knife. He knew I had left it. For the first time, the tension in his shoulders dropped. He let out a long breath. He reached into his pouch and tossed me something. A round, dark nut. I caught it. He cracked one open for himself and ate it, the shell crunching loudly. We sat there in silence, eating nuts by the fire, while the rain started to fall outside again. I didn't know their language yet. I didn't know their customs, but I knew one thing. I had just passed the first test. Trust is a funny thing. It's not built on grand gestures. It's built on the things you don't do. I didn't attack. He didn't kill. We started from zero. But I was about to learn that peace in the valley was fragile. Kara wasn't just hiding from humans. He was hiding from something else. Something that lived in the deeper woods. Something even the giants were afraid of. And my broken leg was healing just in time for me to see it. Time is a strange thing when you take away clocks. In the civilized world, time is linear. It's a straight line of meetings, deadlines, and shifts. But in the cave, time was a circle. It was the sun moving across the floor. It was the fire burning down to coals and being fed again. It was the ache in my knee pulsing with the changes in barometric pressure. I spent 6 weeks in that stone chamber before I could put weight on my leg. 6 weeks of watching. 6 weeks of listening. And that's when I learned that they don't just speak with their mouths. They speak with their chests. The first time I felt it, I thought it was an earthquake. I was sitting by the fire, whittling a piece of cedar with a sharp stone the matriarch had left me. Kara was asleep near the entrance, or so I thought. His massive back was to me, rising and falling like a hairy hill. Suddenly, the air in the room grew heavy. My ears popped. A vibration started in the floor, traveling up through the rock, through the hemlock bed, and into my spine. It wasn't a sound you hear. It was a sound you feel. It rattled my teeth. It made my vision blur for a second. I looked at the matriarch. She stopped her weaving and turned her head toward the entrance. She made a soft clicking sound. Tick, tick, tick. Kara hadn't moved a muscle, but the vibration was coming from him. He was purring. But this wasn't a cat's purr. This was infrasound. It was a frequency so low it could probably stop a human heart if he turned up the volume. He was communicating with someone outside the cave, miles away. I realized then that I had been deaf to half the conversation. I started trying to mimic them. Not the infrasound, my puny human lungs couldn't generate that power, but the surface sounds. The samurai chatter, as some people call it. It's a mix of gibberish, bird calls, and guttural stops. One afternoon I pointed at the waterskin. "Wani," I said, trying to copy the sound the matriarch used. She looked at me, her dark eyes widening. She pointed at the water. "Wani," she repeated, dragging out the vowel. Then she pointed at the fire. "Ska." "Ska," I repeated. She smiled. It was a terrifying sight, lips pulling back over those huge teeth, but it was a smile. I was no longer just a pet. I was a toddler learning to speak. But the education wasn't just vocabulary. It was survival. As my leg healed, Kara started taking me to the porch, the ledge outside the cave. We would sit there for hours, scanning the valley below. He taught me how to look. Humans scan with their eyes, darting from object to object. Sasquatch scan with their stillness. They lock their focus and let the movement come to them. He showed me that a snapped branch at 10 feet high means an elk passed through in a panic. A lack of birdsong in a specific quadrant means a predator is moving. And then he showed me what they were afraid of. It happened in late August. The heat was oppressive, even up in the high country. The haze from distant wildfires turned the sun into a bloody red coin. We were on the ledge. Kara was grooming himself, picking pine burrs out of his forearm hair. I was stretching my leg, wincing as the tendons pulled tight. Suddenly he froze. It was instantaneous. 1 second he was moving. The next he was a statue carved from granite. His nostrils flared wide, sucking in the air. The infrasound started. A low, anxious thrumming that made the hair on my arm stand up. He turned to me and made a sharp gesture. "Down." I dropped to my belly, crawling to the edge of the cliff to peek over. "What is it?" I whispered. He ignored me. He was focused on a patch of forest 3 miles down the valley, near the logging road I had abandoned months ago. At first I saw nothing, just trees, heat shimmer, and rock. Then I saw the glint. Sunlight reflecting off metal. Unnatural. Sharp. Then came the sound. Faint, carried on the wind. but unmistakable to a soldier's ear. Thwup, thwup, thwup. A helicopter. Not a search and rescue bird. This was something else. It was black flying low, hugging the tree line. It was hunting. Ka-Ra growled. It was a sound of pure hatred. He pointed a massive finger at the machine, then curled his hand into a fist and slammed it against the rock. Dust puffed up. Men, I said. He looked at me. His eyes were blazing. He pointed at the helicopter, then at me. Then he mimed holding a rifle. Boom, boom. He wasn't asking if I knew them. He was accusing me. Your people. That night, the atmosphere in the cave changed. The young ones, I had counted 3 of them by now, smaller males who usually stayed deep in the tunnels, came up to the main chamber. They were agitated, pacing, making high-pitched whining sounds. The matriarch was crushing herbs frantically, burning sage in something that smelled like sulfur to mask our scent. We were going dark. 2 days later, Ka-Ra woke me before dawn. He kicked my boot, which I had recovered, to wake me up. Up, he grunted in his language. Gra. He tossed me my jacket. He had painted his face with mud, black streaks under the eyes, green on the forehead. Camouflage. He wanted me to come with him. The descent down the mountain was brutal. My knee was only 70% healed. Every step was a negotiation with pain. But Ka-Ra didn't slow down. He moved through the undergrowth like smoke. No snapped twigs. No rustling leaves. I tried to keep up using the walking stick, sweating bullets, gritting my teeth to keep from groaning. We moved toward the valley floor, toward the smell of diesel. It took us 4 hours to reach the perimeter. Ka-Ra stopped behind a massive fallen redwood. He pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed over the log. We were overlooking a clearing, a cut block where a logging company had illegally pushed past the boundary of the national park. The devastation was absolute. It looked like a bomb had gone off. Ancient cedars, trees that had stood since the Roman Empire, were lying in tangled heaps. The ground was churned into a muddy soup by treaded tires. But it wasn't loggers down there today. It was men in camo. Not military. Private. I pulled out the small binoculars I had in my jacket pocket, one of the few pieces of gear I had left. I dialed in the focus. There were 4 of them. They were standing around a pickup truck. They had dogs, hounds outfitted with GPS collars, and they had rifles, high-caliber, long-range scopes. These weren't hunting deer. You don't use those calibers for deer unless you want to explode the meat. They were drinking beer, laughing, tossing cans into the brush. The disrespect of it hit me in the gut. The noise, the trash, the arrogance. I looked at Ka-Ra. He was watching them with an intensity that frightened me. His hands were gripping the bark of the redwood log so hard that sap was oozing out between his fingers. He wasn't looking at them like a prey animal looks at a predator. He was looking at them like a judge looks at a murderer. He tapped my shoulder and pointed to the left of the truck. I adjusted my binoculars. There was a trap, a massive steel-jawed bear trap chained to a stump, and inside it, my stomach turned over. It was a bear cub, a black bear, maybe a year old. It was dead. Its leg was mangled in the steel jaws, but they hadn't harvested it. They hadn't taken the meat. They hadn't taken the hide. They had just left it there to rot. Bait. They were using the rotting carcass to draw in something bigger, something like Ka-Ra. Poachers, I whispered. The bile rose in my throat. They're hunting you. Ka-Ra looked at me. He understood the tone, if not the word. He leaned close, his face inches from mine. I could smell the pine resin on his breath. He made a series of hand signs. He pointed to the men. Then he pointed to his eyes. Then he made a gesture of closing his hand like snuffing out a candle. Blind them? Kill them? No. He pointed to the dogs. He tapped his ear. He was going to use the infrasound. I watched as he took a deep breath. His chest expanded like a bellows. He closed his eyes. I didn't hear it at first. I felt it in my gut, a wave of nausea. The leaves on the ground started to tremble. Down in the clearing, the dogs went berserk. They started yelping, spinning in circles, biting at their own leashes. The men jumped, startled. "What the hell is wrong with them?" one shouted. The dogs were terrified. They could feel the predator, but they couldn't see him. Then Ka-Ra pushed it harder. The vibration intensified. One of the men dropped his beer. He grabbed his head, staggering. "Whoa, dizzy," he yelled. The infrasound messes with the inner ear. It destroys your equilibrium. The dogs broke their leads, they bolted, they didn't run toward the woods, they ran down the logging road, tails between their legs, screaming. The men were panicking now, they couldn't see anything. Just the dark, silent woods. But they felt the dread. The primal fear that hits you when you realize you are not the top of the food chain. "Let's get out of here," one of them yelled. "This place is spooked." They piled into the truck, tires spinning in the mud, and tore out of there, leaving the trap and the dead cub behind. Ka-Ra exhaled. The pressure lifted. He didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just looked at the dust settling on the road. Then, he did something that broke my heart. He stood up, walked down into the clearing, bold, exposed, and went to the dead cub. He easily snapped the chain of the trap with one hand. He lifted the small broken body out of the steel jaws. He carried it to the edge of the tree line. He dug a shallow hole with his hands, buried it, and placed 3 heavy stones on top. A burial. Respect for the dead. Something those men didn't have. We walked back up the mountain in silence. It took us twice as long because my leg was throbbing with a vengeance, but I didn't complain. I couldn't. When we finally got back to the cave, the sun was setting. The matriarch was waiting. She looked at Ka-Ra, asking a silent question. He just shook his head. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames. I sat across from him. I felt a shame so deep it burned. "I'm sorry," I said. It was English, but I think he understood. He looked at me. He reached over and picked up a piece of charcoal from the fire pit. He drew a figure on the stone floor. A stick figure. A human. Then he drew a line through it. Then he pointed to the wall, to the ancient red handprints of his ancestors. He spoke then, a clear, sad sentence in his tongue. Guraha, Tika, Som. I didn't know what it meant then, but I memorized the sounds. Years later, when I understood the language better, I realized what he had said. The small ones have lost the soul. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my hemlock bed, listening to the wind howl outside. I kept seeing the dead cub. I kept seeing the beer cans. I kept seeing Ka-Ra burying an animal that wasn't even his kin. I realized then that the line between monster and man wasn't where I thought it was. I was the monster. My species was the infection. And Ka-Ra, he was the antibody. But antibodies can only fight for so long before the virus overwhelms them. And the virus was getting closer. I decided then and there, I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to be part of the world that leaves bears to rot in steel jaws. I was casting my lot with the giants. But to stay, I had to become useful. I couldn't just be the cripple in the corner. I had to earn my keep. And the only skill I had was war. Ka-Ra didn't like guns, but he didn't know what I knew about traps, about camouflage, about guerrilla tactics. If the men were coming to hunt us, I was going to teach the tribe how to hunt back. Not to kill, but to vanish. The training began the next morning. Years didn't pass in the valley. Seasons did. I stopped counting Tuesdays and Fridays. I started counting by the berries, the salmon moon, the falling leaf, the first frost. By 1976, I was barely recognizable as the man who drove that Ford truck into the woods. My uniform was gone, replaced by buckskin trousers the matriarch taught me to cure and stitch with sinew. My boots were patched with elk hide. My skin was weathered like old leather. But inside, the noise had stopped. The nightmares of Vietnam were gone, replaced by the serene, hyper-aware stillness of the predator. I had become the tribe's forward scout. Ka-Ra was the muscle. He was the brute force. But I was the strategist. I knew how humans thought. I knew their machines. I knew their greed. Every morning I would patrol the perimeter of our territory, a range of about 40 square miles. I taught the young ones, I called the boldest one Rook, how to spot trail cameras. "Look for the lens," I'd whisper, pointing to a black box strapped to a pine tree by some university researcher. The glass eye. Rook would sniff it, curious. "Don't touch," I'd warn. "Scent." I taught them to walk in the creeks to hide their thermal signature. I taught them to dismantle snares with a stick so they wouldn't lose a finger. I became their counterintelligence officer. And in return, they taught me how to be invisible. But nature doesn't care about your skills. Nature is a cruel mistress. And in the winter of 1978, she decided to punish us. They called it a historic freeze on the news, I imagine. For us, it was an apocalypse. The snow didn't just fall. It buried the world. 6 feet of powder in a week. Then the temperature dropped to 20 below zero and stayed there. The creek, our lifeline, froze solid. The deer moved down into the lowlands, toward the towns, where we couldn't follow without being seen. The elk herds vanished. The silence in the canyon was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the cracking of trees exploding from the cold. Bang, like rifle shots echoing in the night. We were trapped in the cave. The food stores, dried fish, smoked venison, roots, were dwindling fast. Bigfoot metabolisms are like furnaces. To keep a body that size warm, to fuel 800 pounds of muscle, they need calories. Massive amounts of calories. Without meat, they start to burn out. I watched Ka-Ra shrink. His coat lost its luster. His movements, usually so fluid, became sluggish. The matriarch spent her days huddled over the fire, which we kept dangerously low to conserve wood. But it was Rook, the youngest, who worried me the most. He was growing thin. His ribs were showing through his fur. He stopped playing. He just lay near the coals, his breathing shallow and wheezy. Hunger is a physical pain. It's a gnawing rat in your stomach. But watching your family starve, that's a torture of the soul. And yes, they were my family now. I looked at those hairy alien faces in the dim light, and I saw more humanity than I'd seen in any church or city hall. On the 10th day of the freeze, the matriarch made a sound I'll never forget. A high, keening wail. She was holding Rook. He wasn't waking up. Ka-Ra stood over them, helpless. For all his strength, for all his power, he couldn't punch the cold. He couldn't intimidate the hunger. He looked at me, his amber eyes dull and defeated. He was resigning himself to death. That's the way of the wild. When the winter wins, you die with dignity. But I wasn't wild. I was human, and humans are stubborn sons of bitches. No, I said. My voice was loud in the quiet cave. Ka-Ra looked at me. No, I repeated. I stood up. My healed leg ached in the cold, but it held. I went to the corner where I kept my human things, the stuff I had scavenged or kept from the old life. I pulled on my old army parka, now 3 sizes too big for my gaunt frame. I grabbed my snowshoes, crude things I had fashioned from ash wood and rawhide, and I grabbed the one thing I had sworn never to use again, the knife. Ka-Ra growled low. A warning. Where are you going? I pointed to the entrance. Then I pointed west, toward the logging roads, toward the world of men. Food, I said. He shook his head violently. Too dangerous. Too far. Rook dies if I don't, I said. I pointed to the young one. Ka-Ra looked at his son. Then he looked at me. The conflict in his face was devastating. He knew I was right. He also knew I probably wouldn't come back. He stepped forward and placed a massive hand on my shoulder. He squeezed, just once. A goodbye. Then he stepped back and let me pass. The blizzard outside was a white wall. The wind hit me like a physical blow, sucking the heat right out of my lungs. I strapped on the snowshoes and started walking. I knew a place. About 6 miles away, there was a search and rescue cache, a small metal hut maintained by the Forestry Service for emergencies. It was usually locked, stocked with MREs, propane, and blankets. For a Sasquatch, it was an impenetrable steel box. For a man with a pry bar and knowledge of latches, it was a grocery store. The hike took me 6 hours. 6 hours of trudging through waist-deep drifts, fighting the wind that tried to push me off the cliff. I couldn't feel my toes after the first hour. My beard froze into a block of ice. I hallucinated. I saw my platoon walking ahead of me in the snow. I saw my mother. Keep moving, Elias, I muttered. 1 step, just 1 more step. When I found the hut, it was almost completely buried. Only the chimney pipe was sticking out. I spent an hour digging out the door with my frozen hands. I was sobbing with exhaustion, snot freezing on my face. I finally cleared the handle. Locked. Heavy padlock. I wedged my pry bar, a piece of scrap metal I'd found years ago, into the hasp. I put my entire body weight into it. Snap. The metal gave way. I fell inside. The air was stale and freezing, but out of the wind. I clicked on my lighter. The flame was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I scanned the shelves. Jackpot. Boxes of high-calorie emergency rations. Dried beef, chocolate bars, propane canisters, a wool blanket. I didn't eat. Not yet. I stuffed everything I could into my pack. I filled my pockets, I tied boxes to my belt. I loaded myself down like a mule until I could barely stand. Then I turned around and walked back out into the storm. The return trip was worse. The sun had gone down. The temperature plummeted even further. I made it 4 miles back before my body quit. It wasn't a conscious decision. My legs just stopped working. The muscles had no more glucose. The cold had reached my core. I collapsed in a snowbank under a hemlock tree, 2 miles from the cave. I tried to get up. I couldn't. Well, I thought, staring up at the swirling white darkness. You tried, Elias. You tried. I felt warm. That's the sign of the end. Hypothermia tricking your brain. I closed my eyes. I clutched the bag of food to my chest. At least they might find my body. At least they might get the food. I drifted into the black. Then, the ground shook. Thump, thump, thump. I forced one eye open. A shape was tearing through the snow. Not walking on top of it like me, plowing through it. A bulldozer of fur and muscle. Ka-Ra. He had followed me. Or maybe he had sensed my life force fading. The infrasound connection. He reached me. He roared. A sound of pure defiance against the storm. He didn't check the food. He checked me. He ripped his own fur. He had torn patches of his own hair out to weave into a vest, I realized later, and wrapped his massive arms around me. He lifted me up. I was dead weight. But he ran. He ran up that mountain, through the blizzard, carrying me and the supplies like we were feathers. I woke up in the cave. The heat was intense. I was lying near the fire, which was roaring now. He must have burned the last of the wood reserve. But the heat wasn't just from the fire. I was in the huddle. It's something they do. They pile together to sleep, sharing body heat. Ka-Ra was on my left. The matriarch was on my right. Rook was curled up across my legs. I was sandwiched between 2,000 pounds of Sasquatch. Their body heat was radiating into me, thawing my frozen blood. Their fur was tickling my face. The smell, that musky den smell, was everywhere. I tried to move. The matriarch shifted. She looked down at me. She had a smear of chocolate on her mouth. I looked at Rook. He was chewing slowly on a piece of dried beef. They had opened the packs. They had eaten. But they hadn't eaten it all. They had saved the best parts, the fruit bars, the softest meat, and piled it next to my head. Ka-Ra opened his eyes. He looked at me. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a sound. He just reached out a massive hand and rested it on my chest right over my heart. He tapped it. Thump, thump. Then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, soaking into the matriarch's fur. I had saved them. They had saved me. The line was gone. There was no man and beast anymore. We were just a tribe, surviving the dark. That winter took 3 toes from my left foot. Frostbite. I cut them off myself later with a hot knife and whiskey. But it gave me something else. It gave me the right to ask the question that had been burning in me for years. Why? Why do you hide? Why do you let us destroy the world? And when spring came, Ka-Ra finally gave me the answer. You think you want to know. You think you want disclosure. You want the government to come out and say, yes, Bigfoot is real. But you don't understand what that means. Because Ka-Ra showed me the history, not in books, but in the mind. He took me to the place of the ancestors, and he showed me why they went silent. And that's when I learned that we aren't the masters of this planet. We are the failed experiment. The thaw that year came with a violence. The creek didn't just melt, it roared. It tore trees from the banks and smashed boulders together like marbles. The valley was waking up, screaming. But inside the tribe, there was a quietness, a solemnity. After the winter of silent birds, things changed. I was no longer the guest. I was Katana. It means the bridge, or the one who crosses over. Ka-Ra treated me differently. He stopped hiding things. Before, when he would do his evening patrols or perform the tree-knocking rituals, he would leave me behind. Now he waited for me. He wanted me to see. He knew my time was limited. Human bodies are frail compared to theirs. He is 70 years old in human years, but he moves like a linebacker in his prime. I was 40 at the time, and my joints were already grinding dust. He was preparing to pass the burden. In late April, during the first full moon of the spring, Ka-Ra woke me. Not with a kick, but with a touch on the forehead. The matriarch was already awake, painting his chest with a mixture of red clay and ash. Symbols I hadn't seen before. Spirals. Thunderbolts. He gestured for me to sit. The matriarch approached me with the clay. Her touch was gentle, cool. She drew a line across my eyes, then a circle over my heart. I didn't ask questions. You don't ask during Mass. Ka-Ra handed me a pouch of dried mushrooms, psilocybes, potent ones that grow on the decaying hemlocks. Eat, he gestured. I hesitated. I was a sober man since entering the woods. I needed my wits sharp, but his eyes were pleading. Trust me, I ate them. They tasted like dirt and copper. We walked out of the cave under the silver light of the moon. We didn't go down to the valley. We went up. We climbed past the tree line, past the scrub cedar, into the jagged granite peaks where the air is too thin for comfort. This was the forbidden zone. Even the mountain goats didn't graze here. As we climbed, the mushrooms began to take hold. The world didn't distort or melt like in the hippie stories. It sharpened. The edges of the rocks became razor crisp. The stars looked like holes punched in a velvet curtain, letting heaven shine through. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears like a river. We reached a fissure in the rock face. It was narrow, hidden behind a slab of slate. You could walk past it 1,000 times and never see it. Ka-Ra squeezed through. I followed. The air inside was dead, stagnant. It smelled of ozone, like the air right after a lightning strike, and something ancient. Dust that hadn't been disturbed since the Ice Age. We descended. Down into the bowels of the mountain. The temperature dropped. Finally, the tunnel opened into a cavern. If the cave we lived in was a living room, this was the cathedral. It was immense. The ceiling was lost in gloom. But the floor was smooth, polished glass. Obsidian. Volcanic glass formed millions of years ago, and in the center of the room stood a monolith, a single, upright stone, maybe 15 feet tall, vibrating with a low hum. This wasn't natural, or if it was nature acting like an architect. Ka-Ra walked to the stone. He placed both massive hands on it. He closed his eyes and began the infrasound. In the confined space, the effect was immediate. My vision vibrated. My teeth rattled. The sound wasn't just in my ears, it was in my bone marrow. It was resonating with the frequency of the obsidian floor. He looked at me. Come. I walked forward, my legs feeling like rubber. He took my hand, my small, scarred human hand, and placed it on the stone next to his. Look, he rumbled, but he didn't say it with his voice. I heard it inside my skull. I didn't see a vision. I lived a memory that wasn't mine. It rushed into me like a tidal wave. Not words, concepts, emotions, raw data downloaded directly into the nervous system. I saw the beginning. I saw two tribes. One chose the fire, one chose the forest. We are the fire people. We were small, weak, terrified of the dark. So we built walls. We built weapons. We tamed the flame to keep the shadows away. We conquered. We consumed. We looked at a tree and saw lumber. We looked at a mountain and saw ore. We looked at an animal and saw meat. But they, the Sasquatch, they were the forest people. They were strong. They didn't fear the dark because they were the dark. They chose a different path. They didn't build on the world. They integrated into it. They developed the mind instead of the machine. They saw the threads that connect everything. The mycelium network under the soil. The migration paths of the birds. The heartbeat of the earth itself. I saw the great betrayal. Thousands of years ago. We didn't just drift apart. We hunted them. Because they reminded us of what we lost. They were the mirror that showed us our own ugliness. We called them demons, trolls, ogres. We drove them into the high places, into the swamps, into the ice. And they let us. This was the shock. They didn't lose the war. They withdrew. They could have wiped us out. With their strength, their stealth, their numbers back then, they could have crushed us in our sleep. But Ka-Ra's mind whispered the reason. To kill the brother is to kill the self. They chose exile over fratricide. They chose to become the Watchers. The vision shifted. It became darker, more urgent. I saw the modern world through their eyes. It was a nightmare. To them, our cities are tumors, cancers spreading across the green skin of the planet. They see our power lines as webs of poison. They hear our radio waves as a constant, maddening scream that drowns out the song of the earth. I felt Ka-Ra's pain. It wasn't anger, it was grief. He showed me the trees dying, not from axes but from the air itself, the acid rain, the warming soil. He showed me the oceans turning acidic. He showed me the end. It wasn't a prophecy of demons or gods, it was biology. He showed me a tipping point, a moment where the earth, the entity they serve, decides it has had enough of the infection. I saw storms that flattened cities. I saw droughts that turned wheat fields into dust bowls in a day. I saw a silence falling over the human world. And in that silence, the forest people would come down from the mountains, not to conquer, but to reclaim, to plant seeds over our concrete skeletons. I pulled my hand away from the stone, gasping for air. I fell to my knees, vomiting bile onto the obsidian floor. The connection broke. The silence rushed back in. I looked up at Kara. He looked exhausted. He had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The transfer had cost him. He looked down at me with those ancient, sad eyes. Why? I croaked. Why show me? I'm one of them. I'm the enemy. He knelt down. He touched my chest again. No, he rumbled. And this time, he used words I could understand, pieced together from the fragments of language I had taught him. You broke the machine. He pointed to my head. You, listen, to the dirt. He meant my PTSD. He meant my withdrawal from society. By leaving the human world, by suffering, by stripping away the layers of civilization, I had inadvertently retuned my brain to the old frequency. I was a hybrid, a bridge. What do? I wept. I can't stop it. I can't stop the logging. I can't stop the bombs. He shook his head. Not stop, he said. Witness. Tell the story. When the fire burns out, we will be here. We sat there in the dark for a long time. The implications settled on me like a lead blanket. The Sasquatch aren't hiding because they are afraid of us. They are hiding because they are waiting for us to die. They are the designated survivors. They are the backup hard drive for planet Earth. When we inevitably destroy ourselves with our greed and our technology, they will step out of the shadows and restart the cycle. They are protecting the seed of humanity, the real humanity, until the fire burns itself out. Walking back down the mountain as the sun rose, the world looked different. I looked at the distant town lights shimmering in the haze far to the west. I didn't see civilization anymore. I saw a bonfire that was running out of wood, and walking beside me, his massive stride eating up the ground, was the future. Ka-Ra wasn't a monster. He was the Noah of our time, and the Ark wasn't a boat. It was the DNA in his blood. I knew then that I could never go back. How could I? How could I go back to paying taxes and watching TV when I knew that the clock was ticking? But Ka-Ra had given me a mission. Tell the story. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't have a camera. I didn't have a publisher. But the forest has a way of providing. And the end of my time with them was coming faster than I thought. Because the poachers, the men I thought we had scared off, they hadn't left. They had just gone to get bigger guns. And this time they weren't coming for a bear. They were coming for the king. The revelation changed me. I stopped fearing for myself. I started fearing for him. Ka-Ra was the most important living thing on this continent, and I was his only line of defense against the species that kills everything it touches. I prepared for war. I went back to the poacher's trap site. I scavenged chain. I scavenged metal. I couldn't use my rifle. It was gone. So I built things that would make a Viet Cong trap maker flinch. If they wanted to come into our house, they were going to have to pay the toll, and the toll was blood. War is 90% waiting and 10% praying for it to end. I spent 3 days prepping the canyon. I turned that pristine valley into a kill box. I didn't have claymores or napalm, but I had physics, I had gravity, and I had rage. I dug punji pits, tiger traps, concealed with moss and ferns. I rigged Malay whips, saplings bent back with tension, tipped with sharpened spikes. I created choke points using fallen timber to funnel them exactly where I wanted them. Ka-Ra watched me. He didn't help build the traps. To him, modifying the earth like that was distasteful, but he understood the necessity. He moved the tribe, the matriarch, the young ones, the elders, deep into the lava tubes, miles back into the mountain. Then he came back. He stood next to me on the ridge watching the logging road. He wasn't just an animal defending territory anymore. He was a general surveying the line. He had war paint on too, mud and ochre. He looked terrifying, a demon of the old world ready to eat the new one. They came at dawn on the fourth day. This wasn't the drunken poachers from before. This was a cleanup crew, 2 trucks, a black SUV, and a tracked ATV, an Argo, capable of climbing the mud. I counted 6 men through my binoculars. They wore tactical vests. They carried AR-15s with suppressors. They had thermal optics. They weren't hunting. They were exterminating. Someone had seen something. Maybe the poachers talked. Maybe a drone caught a heat signature. It didn't matter. They were here to scrub the anomaly. 6, I whispered to Kara, holding up 6 fingers. He nodded. He inhaled deeply, tasting the air. He pointed to the left flank. 2 men were breaking off, circling wide. I'll take the flank, I signed. You take the center. Wait for my signal. He looked at me. For a second I saw the brother beneath the beast. Then the amber fire in his eyes went cold. He faded into the hemlocks like he was never there. I moved to my position. I was wearing a ghillie suit I'd made from old netting and moss. I blended perfectly. I lay prone on a rise overlooking the creek bed, the main avenue of approach. I waited. The lead element, 3 men, moved cautiously. They were professional. They scanned their sectors. They didn't talk. They used hand signals. Come on, I hissed silently. Step into the parlor. The point man hit the first tripwire. It wasn't a lethal trap. It was a rattler, a line of tin cans filled with rocks falling from a tree. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The noise echoed like a gunshot in the quiet valley. The 3 men spun around, rifles raised, aiming at the noise. Contact front, one hissed. That was the mistake. They focused on the noise. They stopped watching the ground. The second man took a step back to find cover. He stepped right onto the false floor of the tiger pit. Crack! He dropped. He didn't scream immediately. The wind was knocked out of him. Then, the wail started. A guttural, wet sound. The spikes at the bottom were wood hardened by fire. Man down! Man down! The other 2 rushed to the edge of the pit. Now, I whispered. I pulled the cord on the whip. A maple sapling, bent back with 400 pounds of tension, whipped around from the brush. It struck the standing man in the chest. It didn't pierce him. The armor stopped the spikes. But the kinetic energy was like getting hit by a truck. It launched him 10 feet into the creek. Chaos. The thermal optics were useless in the dense brush. They were fighting the forest itself. Pull back! Defensive perimeter! The leader screamed. That's when the screaming started. Not the men. The forest. Kyra unleashed the roar. It wasn't the warning roar, it was the combat roar. It was a sound so loud it distorted the air pressure. It sounded like a jet engine mixed with a lion's fury. He dropped from the canopy. I swear to God he dropped 20 feet from a cedar tree, landing right in the middle of the group. He didn't use weapons. He was the weapon. He backhanded the leader. I heard the neck snap from 50 yards away. The man flew like a rag doll, smashing into a rock. The other man, the one in the creek, opened fire. Pop, 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 pop. I saw puffs of fur explode on Kara's shoulder. He flinched, roaring in pain, but he didn't stop. He charged. A Sasquatch moving at full speed is a blur. It's impossible physics. He closed the distance in a heartbeat. He grabbed the rifle barrel, bent it like a straw, and shoved the man backward into the water. But we had forgotten the flankers, the 2 men I was supposed to watch. I heard the crack of a rifle from the ridge above me. Crack. A bullet hit the rock inches from my face, sending stone shards into my cheek. I rolled, scrambling for cover. I see him. The human. He's on the ridge. They had spotted me. They had thermals. My ghillie suit couldn't hide my body heat. I was pinned. I had no gun, just my knife and my knowledge of the terrain. I scrambled up the slope, lungs burning. Bullets chewed up the dirt around my boots. I was 50 years old, running on adrenaline and hate. I dove behind a fallen log. I saw them. 2 men moving up the slope, leapfrogging. One covering, one moving. They were closing in. I looked down the valley. Ka-Ra was fighting the remaining men near the trucks. He was bleeding. I could see red matting his side. If I died here, they would flank him. They would kill him. No. I snarled. I grabbed a rock. A heavy, jagged piece of granite. I waited. The footsteps got closer. Crunch. Crunch. He's behind the log. Flash him. I heard the pin of a flashbang grenade. I didn't wait. I rolled out before he threw it. It was a suicide move. The man was holding the grenade. Pin pulled. He was surprised to see a wild man charging him. I didn't go for him. I went for the arm. I tackled him. We slammed into the mud. I grabbed his wrist, the one holding the grenade, and slammed it against the rock. He screamed. The grenade dropped. "Run!" I yelled, kicking him away. I rolled down the hill. He tried to scramble up. Boom. The flashbang went off. It wasn't a frag, so it didn't kill him, but the concussion at point-blank range turned his brain to jelly. He was out of the fight. The second man, the partner, was terrified. He saw his buddy go down. He saw a crazy old man with a beard and a knife rising from the smoke like a revenant. He raised his rifle. I was dead. I was 10 feet away, too far to lunge. I braced for the impact. Suddenly a shadow engulfed him. Rook, the young one, the one I had fed in the winter. He hadn't gone to the caves, he had followed us. Rook wasn't as big as Kara, but he was big enough. He tackled the man from the side, hitting him with the force of a linebacker. They tumbled into the brush. I heard a scream, then silence. Rook stood up. He was shaking. He had blood on his hands. Human blood. He looked at me, eyes wide with trauma. "Go!" I yelled at him. "Go back!" He bolted. I slid down the hill to the creek. The battle was over. Silence had returned, heavier than before. The trucks were idling. The air smelled of cordite, sulfur, and blood. Bodies lay in the mud. The tiger pit. The creek. I found Kara sitting against the wheel of the black SUV. My heart stopped. He was breathing hard, wet, rattling breaths. He had taken 3 rounds, 1 in the shoulder, 1 in the thigh, and one in the gut. I ran to him. I fell to my knees in the mud. "Kara!" I choked out. He looked at me. His eyes were hazy. He reached out a hand, trembling, and touched the blood on his stomach. Then he looked at the dead men. He made a sound, a low, mourning wail. He wasn't crying for himself. He was crying because the sanctuary was broken. Blood had been spilled in the holy place. I tore off my shirt. I tried to pack the wound. "Hold on," I said, pressing down. "Hold on, big guy. I can fix this. The matriarch can fix this." He stopped my hand. He gripped my wrist. His strength was fading, but it was still iron. He looked at the trucks. Then he looked at the radio on the dead leader's vest. "St. Team 1, report. Team 1, this is base. We are tracking your vitals flatlining. Drone support is inbound. ETA 10 minutes. The radio crackled. Kara heard it. He understood. More were coming. Always more. The fire people never stop. He pushed me away gently. He tried to stand. He stumbled, roared in frustration, and forced himself up. He pointed to the north, to the deep glaciers, to the places where no human, not even me, could go. He was leaving. He was taking the tribe and vanishing, and he was telling me I couldn't come. "No," I wept. "I'm coming with you. I'm Katana. I'm the bridge." He shook his head. He placed his hand on my forehead. He leaned down until our foreheads touched. I felt the infrasound one last time, but it wasn't a vision of history. It was a feeling. Gratitude. Brotherhood. Goodbye. He pulled away. He let out a whistle. The recall signal. From the shadows, Rook appeared. Then the others, emerging from where they had been hiding. They supported him. Rook took his left side. The matriarch took his right. They helped him walk toward the tree line. At the edge of the woods, Kara stopped. He turned back one last time. He raised a fist. Then he disappeared into the mist. I stood there in the rain, surrounded by dead mercenaries and idling trucks, listening to the sound of the incoming drone. I was alone again. But this time I wasn't running away. I walked to the dead leader. I picked up his rifle. I checked the mag. Full. I picked up the radio. "Team 1, come in." The voice buzzed. I keyed the mic. "Team 1 is gone," I said. My voice was cold. Dead. "This is the forest." "Who is this?" the voice demanded. "Identify yourself." "I'm the one who's going to make sure you never find them," I said. I smashed the radio against the rock. I poured gasoline from the jerry cans over the trucks, over the bodies, over the evidence. I lit a match. As the flames roared up, consuming the scene, I walked away, not north where they went, but south. back toward the world of men. I had a mission now. Ka-Ra told me to witness. He told me to tell the story. But first I had to make sure nobody followed them. I became the rear guard. I spent the next 40 years making sure that Valley stayed haunted. I moved signs. I created fake trails. I scared off hikers. I became the ghost so they could be the gods. I never saw Ka-Ra again. I don't know if he survived those wounds. I like to think he did. I like to think he's up there in the ice, watching us, waiting for the fire to burn out. But the message he gave me, the warning about the end, it's happening. Look around you. Look at the weather. Look at the anger. The machine is breaking. And I'm telling you this now because I'm tired. My watch is ending. I've kept the secret for half a century. Now it's yours. Re-entry is a myth. Astronauts talk about the heat of returning to the atmosphere, the friction. But nobody talks about the friction of returning to a world that thinks you're dead. I didn't go back to the cities. I couldn't. The noise was too loud. The smell of unwashed humanity too pungent. Instead, I stopped at the edge. I found a derelict trapper's cabin near the trailhead of the national forest, about 10 miles south of the canyon. I squatted there. Then I fixed it up. Then I bought it with cash I had buried in ammo cans years before. I became the crazy old man of the mountain. It was a role I curated carefully. I grew my beard until it touched my belt. I muttered when people came near. I stared at tourists with wide, unblinking eyes until they felt uncomfortable and left. They thought I was insane. Good. Insanity is a fence. People don't climb over fences made of crazy. They stay away. And that's exactly what I needed them to do. For 40 years, I stood guard. Every time a logging company tried to survey the North Ridge, I was there. I spiked trees, driving ceramic nails into the wood that would shatter chainsaws without setting off metal detectors. I poured sugar in the gas tanks of bulldozers. When hikers got too curious asking about the hidden valley or the old legends, I told them stories. Horrible stories. I told them the water was poisoned with arsenic. I told them the woods were full of rabid wolves. I told them about the gray man who eats campers in their sleep. I terrified 3 generations of children to keep them safe, to keep him safe, because I knew they were still out there. Sometimes, on the coldest nights of winter, when the sound carries for miles, I would sit on my porch with a cup of black coffee and listen. Most people hear the wind. I heard the frequency, thrum, low, deep, a vibration in the floorboards. It was faint, distant, coming from the high glaciers where the ice never melts. But it was there. He was alive. He was rebuilding. The tribe had survived. And as long as I held the line down here, they could sleep up there. But living between 2 worlds takes a toll. I was lonely in a way that has no word in the English language. I missed the conversation of men, yes. But more than that, I missed the silence of the giants. I missed the telepathy. I missed the feeling of being part of a hive mind that understood the universe not as a resource to be exploited, but as a body to be respected. I walked through the town nearby to buy supplies, beans, coffee, ammo, and I looked at the people. They were sleepwalking, staring at their phones, arguing about politics, obsessing over money that doesn't exist. They were building towers of glass on a foundation of sand, totally oblivious to the tide coming in. I remember one specific Tuesday in 2015. A young man came to my cabin. He was a Bigfoot researcher. He had a YouTube channel. He had drones, thermal cameras, audio recorders. He was excited. He wanted to prove they existed. Think of the discovery, Elias, he said, eyes shining. It would change science. It would protect them. I looked at him. I poured him a cup of coffee and sat him down. Son, I said, do you know what happened to the bison? He blinked. What? Do you know what happened to the passenger pigeon? To the dodo? To the indigenous tribes of this continent? He went quiet. Discovery is the first step of digestion, I told him. We don't protect what we find. We consume it. We put it in a zoo, or we put it on a dissection table, or we put it on a t-shirt. If you love them, let them be myths. Myths are bulletproof. Flesh and blood is not. He left the next day. He didn't go up the mountain. I like to think I saved his soul that day. Or maybe I just saved him from being torn apart by a rook who is now a grown alpha, guarding the pass. But now things are changing. My hands shake. My heart skips beats. The doctor in town says it's congestive heart failure. The engine is giving out. I can't hike the perimeter anymore. I can't spike the trees. I can't scare the tourists. The gatekeeper is dying. And the fire people, my people, are getting louder. The logging trucks are inching closer every year. The drones are getting faster, quieter. The satellites see through the canopy. The hiding spots are disappearing. And that's why I'm talking to you. I'm not telling you this story to entertain you. I don't care about your likes or your shares. I'm telling you this because Kara asked me to witness, and a witness has to testify before he dies. The message he gave me in the Hall of Whispers. I've thought about it every single day for 50 years. When the fire burns out, we will be here. It's not a threat. It's a promise. Look at the weather reports. Look at the mega fires in California, in Australia, in the Amazon. Look at the floods. The earth is running a fever. It's trying to burn out the infection. We are the infection. The Sasquatch aren't monsters. They are the immune system waiting in the wings. They are the backup plan. They have stripped their existence down to the essentials. Community, balance, silence, because they know that technology is a trap. They know that the higher you build the tower, the harder it falls. And our tower is swaying. I'm going to die soon. Maybe next week. Maybe tonight. When I do, I want you to do one thing for me. Don't go looking for them. If you see a track in the mud, step over it and keep walking. If you hear a howl in the night that chills your blood, lock your door and pray, but don't chase it. Let them be. Give them the space they need to survive us. Because one day, maybe 100 years from now, maybe 1,000, the lights in New York and London and Tokyo will go out for the last time. The servers will stop humming. The satellites will fall like shooting stars. And when the silence returns, when the forest starts to crack the pavement and reclaim the cities, they will come down from the mountain. They will walk through the ruins of our skyscrapers. They will touch the rusted skeletons of our cars. And they will plant seeds. They will start again. And maybe, if we're lucky, they'll remember us not as the enemy, but as the lesson, the cautionary tale, the fire people who burned so bright that they turned themselves to ash. I'm ready now. I can feel the vibration. It's getting closer. Ka-Ra is calling the recall. Good night, and good luck.